My name is Rachel Whitman. I'm 43 years old, born and raised in a small town in Ohio, now living in the suburbs of Chicago. I've been married for 20 years to the same man I said I do to on a warm June evening when I was barely 23, starry-eyed and certain that love alone would carry us through anything. But here's the truth I couldn't admit for so long. I didn't enjoy my marriage, not really. I loved him, yes. But for 2 decades, I felt like a passenger in my own body. Like my desires were a locked room I'd lost the key to. No one taught me how to speak up, how to explore myself, how to say I deserve this too. The lace of my wedding dress still clung faintly to my skin hours after the reception had ended, its delicate patterns leaving faint imprints like ghostly fingerprints across my shoulders and waist. The room smelled of roses and champagne. The bed was turned down, the sheets crisp and inviting, and my husband, the newly crowned with that title, stood in the center of it all, his tie loosened, his eyes bright with expectation. I smiled because that's what brides do. I unpinned my veil and let it flutter to the floor like a surrendered flag. I kissed him because I thought passion would come tumbling in like a great wave once I gave it permission. It didn't. The moments that followed were clumsy, quiet, and far too brief. His hands were eager but not curious. His lips found mine with routine, not reverence. I kept waiting for my body to awaken, for desire to bloom like a late flower, but all I felt was the ache in my feet and a growing hollowness in my chest. When it was over, he rolled onto his side with a satisfied sigh. I lay still, staring at the ceiling fan as it whirred in lazy circles, wondering if every bride felt this way. Maybe I was expecting too much. It'll get better, I whispered to myself in the dark. But it didn't. Years passed in a blur of milestones and duties. The birth of 2 children, the purchase of a modest home, anniversaries marked by polite dinners and obligatory gifts. I became adept at playing the role of the good wife, smiling for photos, hosting family gatherings, wearing perfume that he never seemed to notice. Intimacy became a transaction. He would reach for me in the night, and I would comply, willing my mind to some far-off place as his body moved against mine. I learned how to moan at the right times, how to arch my back just enough to make him believe he was satisfying me. It was easier than explaining the truth. I felt nothing. There were moments when I caught glimpses of who I used to be. I'd pass a mirror and, for a fleeting second, see the girl who once danced barefoot in the rain, who wrote poetry in secret, who dreamed of being devoured by love so fierce it made her dizzy. But then the image would fade, replaced by a woman with tired eyes and lips pressed into a dutiful line. My husband wasn't cruel. He provided well. He never raised his voice. But he never really saw me either. Not in the way a man sees a woman and wants to know the map of her soul and body. Sometimes I would hear friends whisper about their passionate escapades, their secret fantasies, their bodies trembling under their husband's hands. I'd nod and smile, playing my part, but inside I felt like I was standing behind a thick pane of glass, pounding to get out. It was during a late-night movie that the first crack appeared in that glass. The scene was simple. A couple in a dimly lit kitchen, their hands exploring each other as though memorizing skin, their breaths uneven with need. My chest tightened. Heat pulled low in my belly. I shifted in my seat, suddenly aware of the space between my thighs. When the credits rolled, I turned off the television and tiptoed upstairs. My husband was already asleep, snoring lightly, one arm thrown over his pillow. I slipped under the covers, heart pounding for reasons I couldn't explain. Lying there in the dark, I let my hand drift to my thigh, tracing circles over soft cotton. The sensation sent a shiver up my spine. My fingers hesitated at the edge of my underwear, and then, just as quickly, I pulled away, shame burning my cheeks. Good wives don't do that. Good women don't need that. But the thought lingered. The next morning, I couldn't meet my own eyes in the bathroom mirror. I scrubbed my face harder than necessary, as if trying to wash away the memory of my own hesitation. Yet something had shifted inside me, a tiny ember, fragile but insistent. It took weeks before I dared to try again. One evening, the house was quiet. The children were at a sleepover. My husband was working late. I locked the bedroom door, my heart thudding wildly, palms slick with sweat. I slid under the covers as though hiding from the world, my fingers trembling as they ventured lower. The first few minutes were awkward. I didn't know where to touch or how, but I kept going, guided by instinct and curiosity. And then it happened. A wave of pleasure, so intense it stole my breath. My back arched, a cry slipping from my lips as tears pricked my eyes, not from sadness, but from something I couldn't name. When it was over, I lay there in stunned silence. My body was humming, alive in a way it had never been. It wasn't just an orgasm. It was a revelation. For the first time in 20 years, I felt like my body belonged to me. From that night on, I began to explore. Slowly, cautiously, but with growing confidence. I discovered what made me gasp, what made my toes curl, what made my stomach clench with delicious anticipation. I tried different touches, different rhythms, and even experimented with fantasies I once thought sinful. I stopped waiting for someone else to give me pleasure. I gave it to myself. The change was gradual but undeniable. My skin seemed to glow. My laughter came easier. Even my friends noticed. "You seem different lately," one said. Happier. I just smiled, a secret blooming behind my lips. My husband noticed too. One night, he turned to me in bed and said, "You've changed. You're radiant. What's going on?" I looked at him for a long moment, debating how much of the truth to reveal. And for the first time in my life, I spoke. The next morning felt different. I woke up in the same bed I had shared with my husband for years, but for the first time, I felt like I was the one occupying it fully. The sunlight streaming through the curtains seemed warmer on my skin, and I caught myself humming softly as I slipped into my robe. My body felt lighter somehow, though the air around me was thick with the weight of unspoken truths. As I brushed my hair, I met my reflection's gaze in the mirror, and there was a softness in my eyes I hadn't seen in decades. It wasn't joy exactly, not yet, but a quiet knowing. A tiny seed of ownership had been planted deep within me. I didn't rush to label it or pick it apart. I just let it be. After all, I had spent 20 years dismissing my body's voice. Maybe it was time to start listening. That day, I moved through the house with a strange sense of presence. Every creak of the floorboards, every sound of my children laughing downstairs felt heightened. It was like I'd been living underwater all these years and had finally surfaced, gulping fresh air into starving lungs. My husband noticed it too. At breakfast, he gave me a curious look as I poured his coffee. "You're cheerful this morning," he said, his tone more puzzled than affectionate. I smiled, not because I wanted to reassure him, but because I felt it bubbling naturally from within. "I suppose I am," I replied, leaving it at that. There was no way to explain what had shifted. Not yet. He didn't press, quickly returning to scrolling on his phone while I watched steam curl up from my cup. For years, I had sought validation in his attention, but now I was beginning to find it in my own silence. As the days passed, I started to crave those moments of privacy again. It wasn't about lust. It was about curiosity and care, like a painter returning to her canvas to study every stroke of color. Late at night, after the kids had gone to sleep and my husband drifted off beside me, I would slip quietly into the bathroom. I lit a small candle on the counter and closed the door, locking it with a click that felt deliciously rebellious. Sitting on the edge of the bathtub, I let my fingers trace gentle patterns over my thighs, exploring with patience and tenderness. Each touch wasn't just physical, it was an act of reclaiming. I learned where my body whispered yes, where it begged for more, and where it sighed with sweet release. These sessions weren't rushed or frantic. They were meditations, a way of unearthing a part of myself I'd buried beneath years of obligations and societal expectations. With each exploration, I began to notice subtle changes in how I carried myself. My posture straightened, my voice grew steadier, and I found myself laughing more freely at small things, the smell of fresh laundry, the sound of rain tapping the window. Friends began to comment, often with curious smiles. "You seem different lately," one of them said as we sat sipping coffee at a cafe. "Happier. Lighter. What's your secret?" I hesitated for a split second, feeling heat rise in my cheeks, but then I simply shrugged. "Maybe I'm finally learning to take care of myself," I said, and it wasn't a lie. They nodded knowingly, though I could see the unspoken questions dancing in their eyes. I didn't know them answers. This was my journey, my secret garden, and for the first time, I didn't feel the need to justify its existence to anyone. My husband, however, wasn't so easily satisfied with silence. One evening as we lay in bed, he rolled onto his side and studied me with a look I couldn't quite decipher. "You've been different," he said slowly. "More confident. Is something going on?" The old me would have scrambled to reassure him, to smooth his ego and avoid conflict. But the woman I was becoming didn't flinch. "I think I'm just changing," I replied honestly. "In a good way." His brow furrowed as if he wanted to probe further, but he stopped short. Perhaps he wasn't ready for the truth. Perhaps I wasn't ready to give it. Instead, he kissed my shoulder lightly and turned back over, leaving me staring at the ceiling with a quiet sense of triumph. I wasn't just a wife lying beside her husband anymore. I was a woman waking up in her own life. At first, I thought I could keep it contained, this secret ritual of mine, this private sanctuary where my fingers became both teacher and student. But like water finding cracks in stone, it began to seep into everything else. I found myself thinking about it during the day while folding laundry or stirring a pot on the stove. Little flashes would bloom in my mind. How my skin felt under my touch, how my breath had quickened, how I had bitten my lip to keep from crying out. I wasn't just craving the release anymore. I was craving the way it made me feel alive, present, powerful. And with that craving came distraction. I burned toast twice in 1 week. I forgot to send my son's permission slip back to school. I stared too long at nothing while my husband spoke to me about work deadlines, nodding absently as though I were there. But I wasn't, not fully. The more I gave in to these moments of self-pleasure, the more I began pulling away from everything else. At night, I would wait for my husband's breathing to settle into that steady rhythm of deep sleep before slipping out of bed. Each time, my heart thudded with a mixture of guilt and anticipation. I started spending longer in the bathroom, longer with the candlelight and the locked door, testing new rhythms, new angles, new ways to bring myself to the edge and over it. I wasn't just discovering my body, I was falling in love with it. But I didn't realize that while I was building this private intimacy, I was simultaneously erecting a wall between myself and the man I had shared my life with for 2 decades. His attempts to reach for me dwindled, his casual touches replaced by a polite distance. At first, I welcomed it. Less pressure, less need to perform. But soon I noticed how cold the space between us had become. The first real crack came one Sunday afternoon. We were in the living room, and he was trying to plan a family trip for the holidays. I sat curled on the couch, scrolling absently on my phone, my mind elsewhere. "Are you even listening?" he asked suddenly, his voice sharper than I'd heard in months. I blinked at him, startled. "Of course I am," I lied, but my tone betrayed me. He set down his tablet and stared at me. "You've been distant lately. Is there something you're not telling me?" His words sank into the quiet like stones in water. My chest tightened. The urge to confess surged forward. A part of me wanted to shout it out, to tell him how I'd finally found pleasure, how I discovered a self he'd never bothered to awaken. But fear held me back. Instead, I shook my head and forced a smile. I'm just tired. That's all. But he wasn't convinced. That night, he tried to initiate intimacy for the first time in weeks. His hand brushed my hip under the covers, tentative yet hopeful. I froze. My body, once desperate for his attention, now felt like it belonged to someone else, me. I couldn't muster desire for him anymore. I made an excuse, mumbling something about a headache, and rolled away. As I lay there, eyes wide in the darkness, I felt his sigh vibrate the mattress. The silence that followed wasn't peaceful. It was heavy with questions unspoken, with accusations neither of us dared to voice. The next morning, I found him sitting at the kitchen table long after the kids had left for school. He looked tired, his coffee untouched. Are we okay? He asked quietly as I moved around the kitchen. The words hit me like a physical blow. Were we? I wanted to tell him the truth. That I had found a secret lover in my own hands, that I was learning things about my body he had never bothered to explore. But I stayed silent, nodding too quickly. Of course we're okay, I said, my voice light. Too light. He didn't press further, but the air between us was strained, full of invisible threads tugging painfully at both of us. The more I returned to my private sanctuary, the more I felt those threads fraying. I began to crave the moments alone, the soft flicker of candlelight, the way my breath hitched as I edged closer to release. It became harder to focus on anything else. Even during family dinners, my mind would drift back to it. I'd catch myself biting my lip, my thighs pressing together under the table, heat rising in my cheeks for no reason at all. I wasn't present anymore, not fully. And deep down, I knew my husband could feel it too. What started as an act of self-discovery was quickly becoming an obsession. I told myself it was harmless, better this than an affair, better this than living forever in a body that felt like a stranger's. But I didn't see the emotional distance growing like a chasm between me and the life I'd built. I didn't notice how I no longer reached for my husband's hand when we walked side by side, how I avoided his gaze in quiet moments, how even my laughter around the children had taken on a distracted edge. And yet, even as guilt gnawed at me, I couldn't stop. I didn't notice how quickly my nightly rituals started consuming me. At first, they were occasional, a quiet escape from the emptiness I felt lying next to my husband. But soon, they became a routine I couldn't resist. Each night, after he fell asleep, I would wait in the dark, heart pounding, until I was sure his breathing was deep and even. Then I would slide out of bed and tiptoe to the bathroom. I didn't care how late it was or how tired I would be the next morning. Once the door clicked shut, I felt relief rush through me. I lit my candle, sat on the floor with a towel under me, and let my hands take over. The need for release was no longer soft or subtle. It felt urgent, heavy, and all-consuming. When it was over, I would lie there for minutes, chest rising and falling, my skin damp with sweat and my mind empty but not at peace. The more I gave in to this private need, the less I wanted anything from my husband. I started pulling away in small ways at first, turning my head when he tried to kiss me, brushing off his hand when he reached for mine. I told myself I was tired, stressed, busy with the kids, but deep down I knew the truth. I didn't want his touch anymore. My body didn't respond to him, not even with irritation or anger. It felt nothing. This new world I had discovered with myself had given me control, and I didn't want to give it up. The distance between us grew thicker every day, like a silent wall we were both afraid to name. The first fight came over something small. He asked if I wanted to go out for dinner on Saturday, just the two of us. I hesitated too long before answering. I don't know, maybe not this weekend, I said, not even looking up from my phone. His voice hardened. You never want to go anywhere with me anymore. What's going on? My stomach twisted, but I kept my tone even. Nothing is going on. I'm just tired. He stared at me for a long time, his eyes full of questions he didn't dare speak. The silence after was worse than shouting. I went to bed early that night, but I didn't sleep. When he turned off the lights and settled beside me, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, my body tense. Even then, part of me still longed for the quiet escape of the locked bathroom door. Soon, it wasn't just night times. I began sneaking moments during the day when the house was empty. While the kids were at school and he was at work, I would lock the bedroom door and let myself go. What used to feel like a sacred act of self-love now felt like a compulsion. I didn't want to stop. I didn't even try. But with every secret session, my guilt deepened. I started forgetting things, appointments, school events, even basic conversations with my husband. He noticed. You're somewhere else all the time, he said one morning as we drank coffee. Where did you go? What happened to you? His voice was soft but heavy with frustration. I wanted to answer, but what could I say? That I was addicted to the feel of my own hands? That I had built a world where he no longer existed? Instead, I shrugged and told another lie. I'm fine. I just have a lot on my mind. But he wasn't convinced anymore. He began watching me differently, his eyes searching for clues. His touches turned into tests, his hand brushing my arm, his lips on my neck, waiting to see if I would pull away. Most of the time I did. When he tried to initiate sex, I would find excuses, headaches, cramps, exhaustion. It wasn't fair to him and I knew it, but I couldn't bring myself to let him in. The thought of his touch felt foreign, almost invasive, like I had built a fortress around my body and locked him out without a key. The fights became more frequent. You're shutting me out, he said one night, his voice rising for the first time in years. It's like you don't even see me anymore. I turned away from him, pulling the covers tight around my body. You don't understand, I whispered. Then make me understand, he shot back, his frustration breaking through. If there's something wrong, tell me. If I've done something, just say it. But how could I explain something I didn't fully understand myself? How could I tell him that I wasn't angry at him, but I no longer wanted what we had? So I stayed silent, and the silence between us screamed louder than any words could. One evening, he came home earlier than expected and found me in the bedroom with the door locked. I hadn't heard him pull into the driveway, hadn't noticed his footsteps coming down the hall. The sound of the doorknob rattling made my heart stop. Why is the door locked? He called out, his voice sharp. I scrambled to pull on my clothes, my hands shaking as I tried to compose myself. I was changing, I stammered when I opened the door. He stood there, eyes narrowing as they searched my face for the truth. You've been locking yourself in here a lot lately, he said quietly. I looked away, unable to hold his gaze. You're imagining things. But even as the words left my mouth, I could feel the weight of the lie pressing down on my chest. That night, he didn't touch me at all. He lay stiffly on his side of the bed, his back to me, and I felt the full distance between us like a chasm. I stared at the ceiling in the darkness, my body aching, not with desire this time, but with the cold realization that I had built this wall and now didn't know how to take it down.